Hey Lakewood 7th graders, this is Miss Van Bickle, and this is the first video in your video series on percents. We're going to be talking about percents for the next week or so, and since I'm new to teaching you, I would like to go back to some of the basics of percents. Some of you may already know this, but it never hurts to repeat it. We're just going to take a look at kind of what a percent is and some of the ways we use them. So in this first example, I'm going to use the example of having a fruit bowl with 20 pieces of fruit in it. And in my fruit bowl, I have 5 apples, I have 10 pears, I have 2 bananas, and I have 3 kiwi. And I'm interested in knowing what the percentages are of the individual fruits in my fruit bowl. So I can write this, I can describe it in many different ways. And one of the ways I can describe it is as a simple ratio. So if I say, well, I have 5 apples and 20 pieces of fruit in total, I can write a part to whole ratio that looks like that. And I don't know if you remember this from 6th grade, but part to whole ratios are also fractions. So one of the things I can do is I can simply reduce this fraction to 1/4, because 5 over 20, 5 divided by 20 is 1/4. And the way I did that was I divided both my numerator and my denominator by 5. So I know that 1/4 of the fruit that I have in my bowl is apples. And I'm also interested in describing this as a percent. And I think most of us are familiar with the fact that 1/4 of anything is 25%. That's one of our very common number facts that if that doesn't pop out at you, it's something you should kind of learn and remember off the top of your head. But the way I got there, I want to show you, because not all of our number facts are things that we should keep and carry around in our head, because we don't need them that often. So what I notice about this is actually saying take 1 and divide it by 4. This bar here indicates division. So I'm going to take 1 and divide it by 4. And what I notice, I'm going to do that off in the margin of my paper. What I notice is 4 doesn't go into 1. So I have to add my decimal place and do that kind of thing. And then I notice, 4 will go into 10 twice, giving me 8. And I'd have a remainder of 2 then. So I have to add another 0 here, and 4 then will go into 25 times. So when I turn that fraction into a decimal, I end up getting 0.25. And to get from the decimal to the percent, we simply take this decimal place and move it to the right, and then add a percentage sign. So I'm also interested in knowing this same information about my pairs. So I'm going to do the same procedure. I'm going to say, well, if I write a part to whole ratio and then reduce it, that's what I get. And then if I do my division and I divide 1 by 2, and be careful, a lot of students want to divide 2 by 1. And remember, you always put your numerator in here. So if I take 2 into 1, I know it won't go, so I have to add again this decimal place. And I notice that 2 goes into 10 5 times. So my decimal place here is 0.5. And then I need to move my decimal twice to the right to get the percentage, but there's nothing here. So in order to make that work, I have to add that 0, and I get 50%. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video and work the next 2. Find out the percentage of bananas and kiwi that I have in my fruit bowl, and then turn on the video and check your answers. So hopefully you've had a chance to try these problems. We have 2 out of 20 bananas, which reduces to 1 out of 10. And when I do my division on my scrap paper, I notice 10 does not go into 1, but if I repeat the process of, adding this decimal place, that 10 will go into 10 one time. And I end up with a remainder of 0. So I don't need to divide anymore. And I have 0.1 for my decimal equivalent of 1/10. If I want to turn that into a percentage, then I'm going to have to add that 0, just like I did up here with the 50%. And I realize that 10% of the fruit in my bowl is bananas. So I added 3 kiwi, and the reason I did that is this isn't one of those numbers we typically memorize. Most people kind of know, okay, 1/4 is 25%, and 1/2 is 50%, and 1/10 is 10%, but I don't carry that number around in my head too much. So the first thing I tried to do is I tried to reduce my ratio, make my fraction simplified, and I realized it already is. I can't really do anything to make that fraction any more simple. So I went to the margin of my paper, and again, I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator, and 20 won't go into 3, but it will sure go into 30 one time. And, oops, I put that 1 in the wrong place. It leaves 10. And then if I bring down a 0, 20 will go into 100 5 times. So I know my decimal equivalent is 0.15, or I have 15% of my fruit bowl, which is kiwi. Now, this exercise might feel a little bit pedantic to you because I don't think anybody goes to their fruit bowl and calculates percentages of fruit in their fruit bowl. But there are times when calculating percentages of different things are very helpful. For example, let's say we had 2 schools. Let's say we had a school like Lakewood that has about 300 students. And I'm going to call this LMMS. And then we have another school that I'm going to call Other School. And it has 600 students. And we are in a competition with the other school to see who can get the most students to participate in after-school sports. And after the competition is all said and done, each school has recruited 150 students to play after-school sports. Now, we might think, well, we tied. They got 150, we got 150, so nobody really won this competition. But if you look at it in another way, we can say, well, Lakewood got 150 out of 300, which reduces to half of its students to participate in sports. And we know that half is equal to 50%. The other school got 150 out of 600, and when we reduce this ratio or fraction, we see that 1/4 or 25% of their students signed up for an after-school sport. So if we take a look at it in terms of the percentages of students that we recruited to play sports, we see that Lakewood is really beasting the other school in terms of their sports participation. So one of the ways that we use percentages is to kind of level things off when our quantities are not comparable, when it's really hard to make comparisons between our quantities. Percentages are often helpful. So this is the end of video 1, and make sure you took good notes and ask good questions in class.